If you're thinking about launching an online course or workshop, then you definitely want to watch this video. I learned a ton after launching my first online course, and I want to share it all with you, plus how much money I made from it, so that you can have a sense of what you might be able to earn. So let's get started. First, some very brief logistics in case you're wondering how to even do this. I decided to host my course with Teachable, which is an online platform that allows you to upload content and sell your course. It has all of the purchasing stuff built into it, so it makes it very streamlined to use. Also, I should say what I created was actually more of a workshop, which is how I marketed it. So in my mind, that just means it's a little bit shorter, not quite as long-term and intensive as a full course would be. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to keep using the term course in this video because that's what people tend to call them. So anyway, that is how I made mine. Honestly, the creation of the actual course content was the easiest part, and I'm guessing it probably will be for you as well. And that's because whatever you're creating a course in, that is probably your expertise, your genius zone, if you want to call it that. It's the area where you feel most confident and where you can really share your knowledge with other people. So in my opinion, the creation of the actual course content is always going to be easier than marketing the course, unless your expertise just so happens to be in marketing online courses, which mine was not up until this point of actually trying it and learning stuff from it. So just know it'll probably take you longer to figure out the marketing stuff. Speaking of which, let's talk about how I actually launched the course and the campaign that I created to try to make it as successful as possible. So I decided that I was going to use all of my different social media platforms to try to leverage every person in my audience as much as possible. I also decided that I was only going to have the launch live for 8 days, and there's a number of reasons behind this, but for the most part, I knew that I was going to have to be really intensive with my marketing, and realistically, I was not going to be able to sustain that over a hugely long period of time, so it made sense to just have registration open for just over a week. But practically, the other reason behind it was that part of my workshop was going to be a live portion, so half of it was going to be the content that people could watch, the slideshows, the videos, that sort of stuff. Then the other half was going to be a live Q&A that I would do a week after the course content was released. So because there was a live component, I needed to have a deadline on the registration sometime before the actual live Q&A. So I chose to do it a week before the Q&A was supposed to be live. So that is why I had a deadline in mind, and that's why I did an 8-day launch. Now, to be honest, moving forward, I think I'm going to do that a little bit differently, but I'll talk more about that later on in the video. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the exact launch campaign calendar that I used for my course marketing. You can see that my approach was really heavily focused on email marketing because that's where I thought my most dedicated audience was going to be. These are people that have downloaded my freebies that were willing to give me their email address, so I thought they would be more likely to purchase the course anyway. Plus, email marketing is known to have a lot better conversion rates than social media, so I think it makes sense to put more of your eggs in that basket because I think that you'll see more returns there. So that's why I decided to go full out on the email marketing. With my emails, I had kind of two separate approaches. You'll see that I mentioned before I had an 8-day launch. Well, there was 8 days where the registration period was actually open, but my marketing started before that in what I call the education period. And then once the registration actually opened, that's when I dove into the sales period. So I just created content very intentionally around the areas that I knew the course was going to speak to in the weeks leading up to the launch. And it was all just educational, value-giving content. This was to get people used to the fact that they could open my emails, get something valuable from me, and feel like it was worthwhile. And that's what you really want to get into people's minds. So when the time comes for you to send an email that is selling something, they'll be willing to check it out and take it into consideration. So I spent a couple weeks just sending high value, educational, informative emails around the topics that the course speaks to. And then once the course actually launched, then I started making emails about the course itself, the frequently asked questions, how it was going to work, what was going to be involved, and all that stuff. Moving on to Instagram, I did a very similar marketing format where the first 2 weeks were a more educational, value-giving time, and then once the course registration actually opened, I shifted into more heavily selling it. Again, this is just because I really believe in serving before you sell, providing value, proving that you have an expertise, proving that you have something valuable to offer. And then when the time comes to sign up for your course, your audience is going to be a lot more trusting of you and a lot more willing to invest. So I wanted to spend a lot of time providing that free information. And it also means that for people who might not be able to invest in the course right now, they're still getting something from me, which I'm always happy to do. So I did 10 days of mini Instagram live workshops, and then during the last workshop, I talked about how I was going to be launching my paid workshop. So I kind of gave a pitch in the final live stream. Then during the actual 8-day launch, I posted 3 times to my Instagram feed talking about the course itself, one time kind of teasing what the content was going to be, then the official launch post, and then another post telling people I'm so excited about the number of people who have enrolled, there's still a chance to join, all that stuff. And then I would say I was probably on my Instagram stories at least every other day, probably closer to daily, talking about how you can register for the course. So that's Instagram and email covered. Let's talk about YouTube. I actually only decided to make one YouTube video where I would talk about the workshop, and this is why. The registration period was going to be so short. It was only going to be 8 days long, and the reality with YouTube videos is they live on so much longer than that. A lot of my YouTube videos get the majority of their views over months and months after launching, not within the first 24 hours. So I was hesitant to make too many YouTube videos advertising the workshop because it would just lead to more people in the future wanting to join but not being able to because registration would be closed. And now getting back to what I was saying earlier about how I want to change this in the future, this is honestly one of the biggest reasons why I'm thinking about changing any of my digital products selling from a short registration period into more of an evergreen model, just because my biggest platform, which is YouTube, also happens to be a pretty evergreen kind of social media platform where a lot of people find their content through search, potentially months after the video is actually posted. So that's why I think in the future, if I were to relaunch this workshop or launch a new course or whatever, I probably wouldn't have a deadline on registration. I would probably just have it be rolling registration, available whenever, cart always open, and then not really have a live component, just so then people can join it and get that information whenever they want, rather than trying to focus on these short-term launches just sporadically throughout the year. I think maybe that model can make sense for people who have different primary social media platforms, and I know that traditionally that model is really preferred by a lot of online course creators because it essentially creates this artificial sense of demand. If you're like, oh, only 8 days to sign up, you have to sign up before this date or else you'll miss it, people are more likely to purchase when there is a deadline. But if you just say, it's open whenever, feel free to buy it now, feel free to buy it in 6 months, then a lot of people will just never actually purchase. So people often create that deadline for marketing purposes. So I think that can be effective, and I understand that, but just for myself, because YouTube is my primary platform and it is very evergreen, I think it makes more sense for me to have my course just available in an evergreen way. And it also feels a little bit more genuine to me, but honestly, there is nothing wrong with doing a short-term registration, whether it's because you have a live component to your course or not. I mean, it's a marketing decision that you can make. So that is pretty much what my entire marketing campaign looked like. A 2-week period of giving value, providing education around the topic of Instagram growth, and then spending 8 days marketing my workshop that was all about turning your followers into fans. So that's kind of a balance that I think is good. You could think 2 weeks of providing value, 1 week of selling, and then it's not too overwhelming for your followers who are never going to buy. Like by the time they hear about it the first time, they're like, yeah, it's not for me, I'm not going to purchase this time. Then you don't have to annoy them with like weeks and weeks of trying to sell to them. So just get it done in a week, move on to providing value again. So here's one last look at the content calendar in case you want to screenshot this for your own reference. So you can feel free to copy this for your own course launch. So here's the real deal about launching an online course. You are never going to get 100% positive feedback, but that is actually a really good thing. If you only get positive feedback, you're not going to be able to grow and change and improve. I am really fortunate to have followers/students that were willing to be honest with me in a way that really helped me to improve the content and know a better way to approach creating a workshop in the future. And honestly, it is tough. I will tell you, it is really hard to receive less than happy feedback from people because you pour your heart into creating a course. You want to do so well, you want to help people, but the reality is not everybody who buys it is going to be 100% satisfied. That is just the reality of how these things go. And so all you can do is try your absolute best to go above and beyond to help those people, to make them feel satisfied with their experience. And then at the end of the day, if they're really not, you kind of have to just let it go and know that you tried your best. That was something that I definitely struggled with a little bit, but to be honest, like 98% of people who took my course were completely happy with it, and that was very encouraging. But you just gotta know how to take that 2% with grace and take it as it is, which is helpful feedback, and try not to get too emotionally invested in it. Honestly, this is part of why I planned to have a live stream component from the very beginning, because I knew that there was potential after I released the main course content that people might have questions, want to know more, want maybe more of a deep dive into a certain topic. So that's why I always had the live stream planned, so that I could go back and provide that extra value if needed. And so I was very glad when I got that feedback before the live stream that I was able to plan ahead of time and go in and really provide a lot of extra value during the live portion. So I would say that's a lesson that you could definitely take away. If you're thinking about launching your first course, consider doing parts of it live, or at least having like a live follow-up session. I was kind of nervous about the idea of teaching completely live off of a slideshow because I wasn't totally confident that I could deliver it in the most valuable way possible. I thought it would be more polished and more succinct if I recorded it ahead of time and then edited it. So that's the way that I decided to go, but I do think it's important to have some kind of live component so that you can adapt, take feedback, and really provide that extra value if your students are looking for more. So that's why I think doing a live stream session can be super helpful, especially in your first course, because you might think that you've covered everything people want to know, probably have not, and you want to be able to do that for them. So consider scheduling a live as part of your course. So just know, because this is something that I hadn't really considered when I was thinking about launching my workshop, was a big part of selling an online course is knowing how to take negative feedback, knowing how to adapt and change and provide extra value when you need to, but also knowing when to let go and when to know, you know what, I delivered everything that I promised. You can't always help it if people have higher expectations from what you marketed that you were providing. You just have to do your best, then try to do a little bit better, and then say, this is what it is. You know, you can't super let it get to you. I think that's the reality of doing business. So now let's talk about the area that most people are the most curious about when it comes to online courses: how much money I made from selling it. Well, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I definitely profited less from this course than I had planned to. And I think that is just how it goes when you're launching your first ever online course or workshop. You don't really have a sense of how many people are gonna purchase from you. It's just kind of a wild guess. Beforehand, I was Googling stuff like typical email conversion rates for online courses, like trying to figure out what percentage of people I could expect to enroll. And honestly, originally my goal was to get 100 people into my workshop. And so based on enrolling 100 people and the purchase price was $79, then that, would have been like gross $7,900 for that launch. That is not how much money I made, because I actually enrolled just around 30 people. Which honestly, that is nothing to sneeze at. I'm still very happy with that. I'm really happy that I was able to provide that information to that group of people. But that just goes to show you that your expectations, it's not always how it's gonna be. So you really do just have to launch and try it out and see what happens, because you can research all the different conversion rates and percentages, but you'll never really know until you actually try. And maybe that sounds really discouraging, because I'm not here being like, oh, I made $1 million and you can too. But I really just like to be honest with you about how these things go and what you can expect from getting into the world of online business, because it's not all of these super glamorous, crazy stories of people doing 100K in their first month of business. Like, the majority of people are not doing that. This was my first ever online course, and I made just under $3,000 from the launch, and I spent a lot of hours creating the content and marketing it and all that kind of stuff. But it's still a very respectable amount of money to make. Like, I definitely am very, very grateful that I was able to do that. But I just want you to know, like, it's not all these wild stories. So this is kind of a realistic take on what you might be able to make from an online course or workshop if you have an audience similar size to me. By the way, though, at the end of the day, when it comes to all of the fees and stuff like that, because it is not free to use Teachable, there's still like transaction fees and stuff from people's credit cards, etc. So I ended up taking home more like $2,600 from it. Cool. Just thought I'd tell you the exact details. So moving forward, I've learned a lot, and I'm definitely going to be changing some of my approaches. First of all, like I mentioned, I'm going to be doing an evergreen sales model instead. I really don't think it makes sense for the kind of platforms that I'm using to do these really short-term launches. I think that they're really glamorized, and people like think they're exciting because you could say, I made $10,000 in 1 week, but that doesn't really fully represent the fact that you spend months or weeks creating the course content, planning your launch campaign. Just because you made that much money, like the income actually came in that week, doesn't mean that, you know, it only took you a week in order to make that money. Like, it took you weeks and months to put together the content and the audience and everything that led to being able to launch with that dollar amount. So honestly, I think that that's just a big flashy internet thing. And I feel like getting sucked into the idea of like, oh, I need to do a launch to make like 6 figures in a really short amount of time. Like, that's not, it doesn't really mean anything. Like, why? It just means that you make all your money from the year in 1 week period instead of just making that spread out over a year. So don't worry about all that stuff. That's what I'm telling myself anyway. I'm just gonna do a plain and simple evergreen sales model. I also really want to get super clear on who the course is for and what is involved. I think what I learned a lot as well is the importance of making sure your marketing is very detailed. I wouldn't say anything I said was inaccurate. Like, I talked about the course in a very honest way, but I think that you can get even more detailed about exactly who will benefit from this, exactly what is in it, because I think otherwise sometimes people can look at the marketing and get really high hopes for what is going to be involved in it, especially when it comes to content around Instagram growth, because people might expect like, oh, I'm going to take this course and immediately become famous on Instagram, and that is definitely not the case. If you watch any of my content, you know I would never promise that, but I think it's just being very explicit in the marketing. So everybody has very good expectations, so then they are more likely to be satisfied with the course. The biggest thing I learned from this experience, you really just have to try it to know how it's going to go. I did so much research and reading about this, but you never really know what your experience will hold until you try it, and you learn so much from it. So you just got to go ahead, try your absolute best, learn from the feedback, and then do it even better next time. If you like this video, you will definitely like this playlist, so make sure you go ahead and press play, sit back, and get ready to learn all kinds of Instagram hacks. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Just press play. What are you still doing here? Click on it. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you over in these videos. Okay, bye.